Oregon's game plan against Michigan this week should look a lot like last week.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get yourself started. Got a special guest on today's show, Jonathan Zaslow of ESPN College Football Tailgate on the radio side of things. We're going to talk about this Michigan game, but I've got three things that I'd like to see Oregon do. And the first one, more than anything, is just play exactly how you played against Illinois. So last week, I had maybe my best ever keys to Oregon winning big of the entire season. Turn the ball over, start hot, create explosives. I could list those exact same keys for this week and just say, well, let's just copy paste the game plan. Do it again. Illinois beat Michigan 21-7 a couple weeks ago. Oregon beat Illinois 38-9. It should look like that, and it can absolutely look that way. But key number one that I've got for Oregon, and I almost made this key number two, but I think key number one to getting a convincing big win is create explosives. And that's going to come down to either Evan Stewart or Tez Johnson. Because on the other side of the ball, you've got a corner in Will Johnson who, as you'll hear later in today's show, is very widely seen as a high-level first-round draft pick. He is a stud. Now, Denzel Burke is also a guy that has NFL potential. Will Johnson is widely seen, I think, nationally as the best cornerback in all of college football. So if he's able to take away or limit one of Oregon's stud receivers, that leaves an opportunity for the other one. And we saw that against Ohio State. Sometimes Tez was covered. Go to Evan Stewart. Sometimes Stewart was covered. Go to Tez. Go to Terrence Ferguson. Go to Kenyon Sadiq. Like, there are a lot of options on this Oregon offense. But if you create those explosive plays, you put Michigan in a position that they just don't want to be in. Last year, Michigan was built on getting a lead. I don't think they trailed until the college football playoff semifinal game against Alabama. Like, they were dominant in that sense. They're trying to replicate that same formula. They haven't been as successful with it. And they're throwing for 130 yards per game through the air this year. It's not something they're capable of doing consistently. So if you come out, create those explosive plays, number one, you take the crowd out of it. And number two, you score quickly and make Michigan think, uh-oh, we got to play catch up. And that's not where Michigan wants to be. It's not where they wanted to be last year, but they were just such a good team and had so many NFL guys across the board, and they've got a few on this team as well, that they were able to execute that game plan on a weekly basis. But if you come out and you create explosive pass plays like they did early against Purdue or early against Illinois, you then have limited passing attacks that are going to feel that pressure of, hey, can we really keep running the football here? And they run for 170 yards per game on the ground this year. I don't think that's quite as good as it was a season ago, but I think that if you give them that mindset, they have had a tendency this year at times to throw it more than I think their fan base really wants them to, or more than anyone who watches the game thinks that they should, because they just haven't been the wide receiver room. They don't have any playmakers there, at least not consistently. And Colston Loveland at tight end, he's been really good, but when they're not able to throw him the football, they're not able to throw the football. It's really been that simple. And they're back to Davis Warren, but you want to put them in obvious passing situations. And last year, they were also around 170 rushing yards per game, but they threw for 213 a game. So they had a much more capable passing attack last year. And I think if Oregon creates those explosive plays and scores a couple of points early, you don't just take that crowd out of it, but you put them game plan wise in a place that they don't want to be. And yeah, it's very similar to Illinois last week, but I think it's even more important against Michigan because Luke Altmaier is a more capable passer than any quarterback that Michigan can play in this game. It'll be Davis Warren to start. Could see Alex Orji as well. But I think that can work incredibly well for Oregon, not just to pull ahead quickly, but to stay ahead quickly because I trust this pass defense a lot. Key number 2, stop the run. Stop the run. This was not one of the keys I had against Illinois last week because their offense was just kind of And Michigan's offense this year, also, meh. has not been very good. We saw what the Illinois defense was unable to do against Oregon's offense a week ago when Oregon put up 35 points in the first half. Michigan only scored 7 on that same Illinois defense. Now, they did that on the road, and this game is, of course, being played at the Big House. But if you take away Michigan's ability to run the football, I have no faith that they'll be able to move it up and down the field. And I think Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy have got that defense playing better than they ever have in this, now their third season at the helm for the Oregon coaching staff. They're playing exceptionally well. And Jordan Birch, I would love to see him play again. Of course, you always want to have more playmakers than not. But even if he doesn't play, the defensive line's been great. Derek Harmon had a quote after practice earlier this week, asked about his time at Michigan State and his feelings on Michigan. He said, "Don't like him. I'm going to leave it at that." And I saw that and thought about how good Derek Harmon has been this year and thought, maybe if you find a prop anywhere, maybe using our friends at FanDuel, try to hit the Derek Harmon over on tackles or sacks or impact plays. There is a part of Derek Harmon that really wants to win this football game. I don't think he beat Michigan in the 2 years that he was at Michigan State. I think he's going to show up pretty motivated and ready to go. And he hasn't had any problems making an impact literally every single week for this Oregon defense, but he might have a little bit of an extra edge there. And if he and Jamari Caldwell and Jeff Bossa and the guys at linebacker are able to take away that rushing attack for Michigan, they don't have a way to move the football down the field. And they can run it on you. They can run it. Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards, when you get them going in the ground attack, they're really, really good. Donovan Edwards, of course, was really good in the national championship game, and Mullings has come on big time this year for the Michigan offense. But I think actually, to the surprise of many, especially those that play EA College Football 25, where Edwards was on the cover, I believe, and I'm double checking here, yeah, Mullings is outgaining Donovan Edwards so far this year by a couple hundred yards. He's been the main guy, but Mullings is about 5.5 yards a carry. Edwards is under 5 so far this year. They haven't been able to get him going. I wonder, as Isaiah Hull talked about a couple days ago here on the show of Locked On Wolverines, whether they use Donovan Edwards in the passing game. But if you take away the rushing attack, Michigan's just not going to be able to sustain drives, not with the way that this Oregon defense is playing. So those are the first two keys. And then key number 3, win the turnover battle or at least be neutral. I don't think Oregon needs to be +2, but you can't be negative. That's it. And yeah, that sounds kind of obvious here, but if Oregon turns the ball over twice, but they turn Michigan over twice, Oregon can win the game by a lot. And if Oregon turns the ball over twice and Michigan turns the ball over 1 or 0 times, Oregon can still win the football game. It'll just be a lot harder. These are the keys to Oregon getting a comfortable win like they did against Illinois last week. But if you can just come out even or plus in the turnover department, even if you have an interception or a fumble or two, or Oregon will be just fine. Because I know that this Michigan offense cannot go blow for blow. They have to play an incredibly efficient, effective game, just like Illinois last week. They're going to have that same sort of game plan. I think they're even more committed to it than Illinois was a week ago. I mean, Luke Altmaier threw, 30-ish passes in that football game? I don't think Michigan will throw the ball that many times with Davis Warren back there because they just don't have the weapons or the consistency to make that happen. So if Oregon creates explosive plays, takes away the run game, and is at least even in the turnover battle in this football game, I think you'll see Oregon cover that 15.5-point spread. And I'll have my score prediction tomorrow on the show. You're just going to have to wait. But I think Oregon wins, and I think Oregon will cover as well. Got a really cool special guest coming up next. Yeah, you want to stick around for that. Thoughts on the matchup? Thought on what the game actually means in Ann Arbor? Coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, they're giving new customers this really sweet deal where you bet $5 and you get $150 in bonus bets if you win. Yeah, that's right. It's that simple. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. They have college football as well. Do not fret. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. They've got Oregon as a 15.5-point favorite. I think Oregon's very capable of covering that particular number. $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's available at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's talk big-time matchups in this Oregon-Michigan game. And joining me to do that, Jonathan Zaslow, ESPN Radio College Football Tailgate, joining me for the last two segments here on today's show. Jonathan, it's great to have you here, and I want to dive just straight into it. When I say Oregon-Michigan, what is the matchup or player that you think is most important in this football game?
Look, for me, I'm just trying to figure out a way that Michigan's going to be able to move the football. You know, that's been the big thing all season for Michigan. They could barely throw a forward pass. You know, I know they're going back to Davis Warren this weekend. So maybe, you know, the offense moves a little bit better than they have really for the last month or so. I saw Michigan early in the season. We were in Ann Arbor for college football tailgate for Michigan and Texas. You know, the difference between the talent just pops off the field. Obviously, you lose a little bit with no Harbaugh. But Michigan struggles with the forward pass. They run the ball just fine, although Donovan Edwards, you thought he'd have a little bit of a bigger season than he's having. So I'm disappointed with Michigan so far this year. And then you look at Oregon, you know, the one game that they played against a powerhouse, we know they won. They beat Ohio State. But otherwise, they're smoking teams. And Michigan just is not very good this year. Obviously unranked now. They dropped out of the top 25 a couple of weeks ago. I'm trying to come up with a way that Michigan keeps this game close. I don't see it, Spencer.
Yeah, and early in the season, if this game had been played, I think my concern level would be a lot higher. And even though it's a road contest, you're in the big house, I don't worry about whether Oregon is going to be able to find a way to win the football game. I'm trying not to be overconfident, frankly, and say something that'll come back to bite me in the rear end later. You know, something to the effect of, yeah, I don't think there's any way that Michigan hangs around. But I'm kind of with you that everything on paper is in favor of Oregon. Everything. The offensive numbers, I think Oregon's defense, frankly, has been better and more consistent than Michigan's this year. They gave up 10 points, and one of those touchdowns was with second unit guys on the field against Michigan State. And Michigan last week gave up, only 17 points. Like, they still have a good defense on that side of the ball.
Michigan does have a good defense. Will Johnson could be the number one overall pick in the draft. All right, he's certainly going to be the top.
Could he go number one as a corner?
I mean, I'm looking at Mel Kiper's rankings the other day, and it wasn't Mel Kiper, excuse me. It was one of the other ESPN.com draft analysts.
Todd McShay.
No, it wasn't McShay. I don't even think he's with us anymore. But it wasn't, it wasn't a mock draft, but it was a rankings of top players that are going to enter the draft. And Will Johnson's number one. Now, we know that cornerback, it's one of the four premier positions. We're talking cover corner, pass rusher, left tackle, quarterback. So it doesn't stun me so much that a corner can go number one, but he's that good. Will Johnson is great. You got the two defensive linemen as well that are NFL caliber guys. They're going to be taken on the first day most likely also. And look, Michigan's tight end he's going to play on Sunday too. It's just a matter of who's going to get him the ball. So Michigan's defense is very, very good, but obviously you see the numbers that Oregon's put up. Dillon Gabriel, I mean, at worst right now, are we talking like number 3 around Heisman talk? I mean, you probably feel that he should be even higher, but I feel like number 3, number 4, Dillon Gabriel, Heisman, like we know he's big time. So even though you got those kids on Michigan's side who are going to be serious NFL players, I think Oregon's offense is too much.
It's funny you say that remark about Dillon Gabriel and the Heisman Trophy, because I actually don't think he should be any higher than 3. I don't think he should be any lower than 5 with the way that he is playing football right now. But if you gave me a Heisman vote and I was, taking off my Oregon blinders, I'd probably have Ashton Genty number 1. I'd have Travis Hunter number 2. I'd probably have Cam Ward number 3. Like, Dillon Gabriel has a better team around him than Cam Ward does, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing for Oregon. And I want to go back to that Texas game for a moment, because I've thought about that a lot coming into this week. I think this game is going to look a lot like that. You were there in the big house for that game. How was Texas able to find success against this Michigan defense, and how do you think, if you think, Oregon can find that same sort of success?
I mean, the Quinn Ewers that we saw this past week, where he looked like he really is back
shaky.
to being Quinn. Right, but this past week we were in Vandy actually for Texas and Vanderbilt. and he looked fantastic, especially the first half of the game. Vanderbilt's defense was really good the second half, and it was a great game. But the 2 games before that, Quinn Ewers, obviously the Oklahoma game, I think we all know now Oklahoma stinks, all right? And Quinn Ewers was not even any good in that game. They still wind up winning 34-3. And then, of course, the next week, we know Quinn Ewers wasn't any good, and they lose to Georgia. But seeing him up close at Michigan, it was week 2. Like, the guy that we saw this past week at Vanderbilt was the player that I saw in Ann Arbor early in the season. I mean, they were slinging the ball all over the field, and then they're able to run all over you in the second half and drain clock. Like, that game was not even close. So with that said, I think you're going to get a little bit of that from Dillon Gabriel and Oregon's offense, especially early in the game as well this weekend.
Do you think it's as simple as throw away from Will Johnson? He's too good. Don't challenge him. Because I heard a lot of hype. And look, Denzel Burke and Caleb Downs, and Downs is safety, not a corner. But Denzel Burke was supposed to be one of the best corners in the country. I think he still probably is. And Evan Stewart worked him at Autzen Stadium. Is Will Johnson that next level sort of guy in your view, to where Dillon Gabriel should just look and see where number 2 is? He wears number 2, right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just look to where number 2 is and say, okay, I'm not throwing the football there, but it'll go to any one of the other 6 or 7 weapons that Oregon's got in the passing game.
See, that's the point. Like, it's hard, right? You don't want to just totally avoid throwing to what is likely going to be your best receiver that Will Johnson is going to be following around. But when you're a team, when you're the number 1 ranked team in the country, you have more than just one great wide receiver. So why would you try and force the ball to that side of the field when you can just use one of your other weapons? So, yeah, I think I'm not trying to stay completely away from Will Johnson if something's there, but it's probably not my first read when I'm dropping back to pass if I'm Dillon Gabriel.
On the defensive side of the ball, when you've seen Michigan's offense struggle this year, what position group do you think they struggle with the most? Like, when they can't throw the ball, is it just a function of, the quarterback cannot read a defense and then throw an accurate pass? Or is it, he's got a lot of pressure in his face, or corners are giving him trouble? Like what is it about this Michigan offense that the Oregon defense can capitalize on?
Well, Davis Warren really struggled early in the season. And then they go to Alex Orji. And I think Orji actually started the second half of the game against Texas that I was at. They then go to Alex Orji, but he literally can't pass. He is only a running quarterback, So, and then you get to a point now at this point in the season where, because of injury, they now have to go back to Davis Warren. He can throw the ball, all right, that's for sure. But I would expect them to try and go to the tight end is so big. Loveland, he is so big. He is easily their best pass catcher. So I think if you're Oregon's defense, you're trying to take that away, and then things become really difficult for Michigan.
They've had several games this year, at least 2, I believe, where they've had under 100 yards passing, including, by the way, in a win against USC. They threw for 32 yards and found a way to win the football game. I've been supremely confident in this Oregon pass defense all season long. My confidence is not wavering in any respect going into this game against Michigan.
Oregon gets a little bit lucky, right, going into the Big Ten this year, where obviously Ohio State was such a monster game, but you're getting Michigan on what is clearly not a national championship Michigan team. No Penn State on the schedule. No Indiana on the schedule. I would expect Oregon to – there's no reason Wisconsin have been playing better before last week, but they were not good teams that Wisconsin was beating. I don't know how we get to the final game of the season where Oregon is hosting Washington and you're not saying to yourself, all right, it's just one more undefeated onto the Big Ten championship.
I think that's the expectation for Duck fans. That's my expectation. I predicted them 12-0 before the year began, and, I haven't wavered off of that, at least – until I get some other information that makes me think, someone can really go toe-to-toe with the Duck. Like, maybe Michigan makes it happen this week. I have not seen that yet.
It's a cool helmet game,
Yes, it is a very cool helmet game.
Michigan, it's Oregon at the Big House for the first time ever in a conference game. So there's certainly juice to it, but I don't know how Michigan keeps it close.
Yeah, we're going to talk about those implications because I think it's curious, to say the least. That's coming up next. First, let's talk about 5 Hour Energy. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or those agonizing late game dramatics. So that's why they've created the 5 Hour Energy shot, because it's a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like you and me, the fans who are first in the parking lot and last to leave. We see you, and we know that you need something just like this. So when there are big plays, you got to have that extra juice at Autzen Stadium. 5 Hour Energy is the way to go. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long, and that's why the limited edition Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help you keep yourself fueled throughout the entire season. Available on 5hourenergy.com, and guess what? It's shipped nationwide. 5hourenergy.com. All right, wrapping up today's show with Jonathan Zaslow of ESPN Radio College Football Tailgate. This game before the season, Jonathan, was top 10 matchup. It was maybe Big Ten title implications, national title implications. You still have those two on the one side for Oregon, but you don't for Michigan. That Ohio State game, in so many ways, was just a massive statement for the Ducks to the country and to the conference. Like, hey, there's no adjustment. There's no transition here like the rest of the former Pac-12 schools, RIP. And I think Oregon has really arrived in the most emphatic way possible. Do they add another level of that reminder to everybody else with this game against Michigan, or have the Wolverines struggles? They're a 5-3 football team, by the way. It's not as if they're under 500 and going to miss a bowl game, but has that worn off to the point where if Oregon wins, the rest of the Big Ten, we'll just kind of write it off and say, Michigan wasn't any good?
I think the answer is yes, that there's nothing positive can come out of this game for Oregon. Only something bad can come out of it. Obviously, if they lose, it's a disaster. If the game is close and Oregon still wins, that's not a good thing for Oregon. I don't think anything positive can come out of this for Oregon. The only story ends up being if the game is close or, of course, if Oregon loses. Now, what helps Oregon's case is, all right, it is the big house. If the game was in Oregon and you crush Michigan, who the hell cares? But if you go to the big house and you just put it on them for 60 minutes, all right, then they could say, hey, Oregon, we know they're not intimidated. It's an incredible venue. It's a physical Michigan team. The defense is very, very good. I don't think anything outside of a blowout can help Oregon in this spot. Only bad things can happen for the Ducks this weekend. But I don't you go into this season, and obviously Oregon, Ohio State was the game that you circle. You look at the Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan, everybody has that circled. Everybody's excited for that game. But you put that aside, Oregon, Ohio State was the game, I think, that everyone had circled on their calendar for the Big Ten. And obviously Oregon, phenomenal game. They win by the slimmest of margins, but they passed the biggest test.
Speaking of that slim margin, there is a scenario in which the margin of victory there could come into play if Oregon wants to win the Big Ten in its first season in the new conference. Because if Penn State and Indiana were to both go 12-0, now I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, they're aren't they playing each other? Doesn't Indiana have Penn State, or do they have Ohio
Indiana
State?
Does not have Penn State. They both have Ohio State. They both have Ohio State on the schedule. I don't think Ohio State's going 0-2 of those games. They could go 1-1. I don't think they're going 0-2. And in fact,
so
I think
rooting for Ohio State then. We want Ohio State to beat Penn State in that spot, and then Oregon is golden, right?
Well, that's the craziness of all of this is Oregon beats Ohio State 32-31. And so as a result, they of course have the head-to-head and the record advantage over Ohio State right now. But if Ohio State loses to Penn State, and if Ohio State also loses to Indiana, they have Penn State on the road this week. They have Indiana at home later in the year. If they lose both of those games, my understanding, Jonathan, is that if those games are won by more than 1 point by Indiana and Penn State, if they were 12-0, they would get the advantage into the Big Ten title game over Oregon, who'd be 12-0, number one in college football, and not playing for a conference championship.
We're dealing with something similar here, too, where we're all trying I'm here in Miami. I'm in South Florida, and you got the ACC. You got undefeated teams, including the Miami Hurricanes, atop the ACC, and we're all focused on the college football playoff and how all of that seeding comes out, which, by the way, on Tuesday, you have the first college football playoff rankings coming out.
Very first one, yes.
But I feel like we also have to learn what each tiebreaker scenario is without divisions now in these. Like it was so much
because Clemson and Miami don't play either, right?
Right, and Miami doesn't play SMU. SMU's undefeated also.
Pitt is also unbeaten in the ACC, and SMU and Pitt are playing this week. So one team's going to have a loss, but one team's still going to be unbeaten with 3 regular season games left, 3 or 4.
Right, so it's a little confusing to also have to keep track of how these tiebreakers work. But in Oregon's case, and it's pretty stupid if you're going to have the number 1 team in the country that loses out on getting to win their conference championship. But, I mean, overall, we all know what it's about. I mean, Oregon would have the number 1 seed and a first-round bye in the I guess
they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't have the bye.
5.
Yeah, they'd be the number 5 seed as a 12-0 non-conference champ because you have to be a conference champion in order to get a first-round bye.
And that's a big deal because then you got to win 4 games instead of winning 3 games. To win the national championship. But you know what, Spencer? I really think just like how you mentioned with the ACC and SMU and Pitt are playing this weekend, and Indiana is still playing Ohio State. I think these things work themselves out before the end of the season.
I agree.
Super complicated right now. I think in 2, max 3 weeks from now, it's not going to be as complicated.
Yeah, we've had these scenarios before. The Pac-12 a season ago, by the way, you had Oregon at 5-1, you had Washington at 6-0, you had USC at 6-0, and Utah was 5-1, 6-1. And I started talking on what was then Locked On Pac-12, again, RIP, about what the tiebreaker scenarios were and what sort of chaos could ensue, and it worked itself out. And the lesson I think that fans should always take away is help in college football is often given to those who hold their own, which, yes, for those of you Harry Potter fans out there, was half of a Harry Potter quote, because help is always given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. But if you do everything you can control far more often than not, and I'd say over 80% of the time, Jonathan, you get the result that you deserve. You get the result that you're looking for. And these tiebreaker scenarios, maybe they do come into play, but one of Ohio State and Penn State is obviously losing on Saturday, and I think that's going to be Penn State, and that'll be the first step, and then it'll come down to Indiana and Ohio State. But then if Ohio State beats Penn State, it doesn't matter. It does, right? Because then Penn State would have a loss. Ohio State's got the loss. So if Ohio State wins this weekend, that crazy world where Oregon is 12-0 and does not make the playoff, or does not make the Big Ten championship game, rather, it goes away. Because then it'd be, Indiana's 12-0. Okay, well, so's Oregon. 12-0. Boom. Here are your Big Ten championship.
Yeah, no, just as important for Oregon this weekend, who I do not believe struggles against Michigan, but just as important for Oregon this weekend, Oregon fans, you're watching Oregon and Michigan, and you're rooting for Ohio State over Penn State. Like, those 2 games hold equal weight for the Oregon fan this weekend.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
A little bit more to Oregon because you got to take care of your own business.
Yeah, got to take.
But once Oregon goes ahead by 3 touchdowns, you're making sure you're catching the end. I know it's big noon, so Oregon's going to start probably right at the end. You got that in your back pocket, and then you can just pay full attention to Oregon and Michigan.
Yeah, so last weekend, Oregon, of course, got the big win against Illinois. And the week before, they did against Purdue. It's been a while, it feels, 3 weeks to be exact, since Oregon has played a close football game. You and I both think that Oregon will win this game pretty comfortably and cover I think it's up to 15.5, according to our friends at FanDuel last time that I had checked. But let's take the other side, because there have been a lot of college football games where people on shows just like this one or many others have said, well, this game isn't going to be close. I mean, how many people would have picked Alabama to roll against Vanderbilt? Well, they won the game outright there. So crazier things have happened than Oregon losing at Michigan here. If Oregon struggles or, God forbid, loses the football game, Jonathan, what do you think that looks like? What are the 2 or 3 things that Oregon's really got to stay away from?
I mean, I really think the only way Oregon struggles here is if for some reason Dylan Gabriel can't play, which obviously means he gets hurt. Like if something bad happens, if they're just playing heads up, they're playing straight up for 60 minutes. We saw Michigan barely got past USC. They won that game late. That USC team sucks, and Michigan barely got past them. I think
USC is okay.
Really? Yeah. I'm okay.
I think USC is okay. I do not think it was an accident that they had a 20-6 lead on Penn State at the half. Now, they can't finish football games, but I don't think that they're that far away from being a good football team again.
But Oregon's not okay. I mean, Oregon's great. And so I don't see a way that this game is close. I guess the only way would be if Michigan is able to run the football, you're trying to limit possessions. And that also means that if you're Michigan, you have to be perfect. All right. So running the football, we know Michigan's got great defense. If this game is played in the low 20s, then maybe Michigan has a chance. But I don't expect Oregon not to be able to score 30, at least 30.
Jonathan Zaslow, ESPN Radio, College Football Tailgate. You want to sign off with a prediction? You got one for the game? Score prediction?
Okay, let's do it. And again, College Football Tailgate for anyone who's going to travel to see the game. We are live there. We're right across from the stadium. We're right across from the big house. We got the Airstream studio. So from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern time, College Football Tailgate, ESPN Radio. You come by, say hello. It's a lot of fun. And Ann Arbor, I was there earlier this year. They do it right with the tailgating. All right, prediction. Let's go. Oregon, 34. Michigan, 13.
All right. My prediction comes tomorrow. You're all just going to have to wait for it. Jonathan, we appreciate the time. I appreciate all of you listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.